2025 was a pretty big reading year for me, so let me quickly go over all the books I read in 2025, and at the end I'll let you know which one was like my favorite and talk about like some award things. So, 2025 was the year that I read all of Octavia E. Butler's books. So, let's start with Octavia E. Butler. And let's start with the series of hers that I wasn't the biggest fan of. These three. I forget even what the name of this series is, but it's a science fiction series that takes place basically like human beings are interacting with a new alien species, and the alien species have these like really cool bio spaceships. And basically, I didn't like these books very much, but I did like them enough to finish them. I felt like these were really heavy on the atmosphere and on the world building, and I thought that was really interesting. And I thought that they lacked story and character development. And I'm not sure if that's how science fiction, like kind of like hard science fiction, usually is, because this was kind of my first foyer into science fiction in general. One of the things that I was really excited about reading Octavia E. Butler is that Octavia was a writer here in Los Angeles. Not only here in Los Angeles, but here in Pasadena, the part of Los Angeles that I live in. And not only did Octavia live here and write here, but her childhood home that she grew up in and wrote most of these books in is a block away. And I talked to the current owner. It was a wild story. I was walking around reading this book, actually, Fledgling. I was walking around reading Fledgling. He's like, "Hey, what are you reading?" I was like, "Oh, this Octavia E. Butler book." He's like, "Would you believe that this is her house?" Anyway, I really liked Fledgling. Fledgling is a vampire story, but one of the things that really differentiates Fledgling from other vampire stories is that in Fledgling, vampires and the human beings that they suck their blood from have a symbiotic relationship where both parties benefit from it. And it's not like a utopia, like there's issues that they have to work through, but I thought that that was a really fascinating idea for a vampire story. Unfortunately, with this, I felt like the narrative, there was like three main events, and everything in between the main events was just kind of like, I don't know. I don't want to say filler, but I just don't think that the entire arc of the story was well crafted. I think the idea of the book was more interesting than reading the actual book itself, which is a bummer because I really like the premise of this book. Now, the books that you may be most familiar with Octavia E. Butler are these two, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents. I really liked these. So these are set in Los Angeles. It is a dystopian version of Los Angeles. And I'll try not to give away too much of the story if you're interested in reading these. But what I would say is Parable of the Sower is pretty simple. I was almost underwhelmed with it. If I didn't grow up in Los Angeles and was intimately aware with a lot of the locations that took place in this book, like for instance, there's one section of the book where they're literally walking across the 23 freeway, like from Thousand Oaks, like down towards the beach. If it wasn't for things like that, I think I would have liked it a lot less, actually. But Parable of the Talents, I absolutely love this book. So, this book is written more or less kind of like from three different perspectives. And the way that those three perspectives are in the beginning of the book to where those three perspectives are at the end of the book is fascinating. I think that from just a quality of writing standpoint, Parable of the Talents might be Octavia's best work, or at least my favorite of Octavia's. So if you're into dystopian stuff, if you are into things set in Los Angeles, I would recommend the Parable books. So These collection, I think, are called the Pattern Master series. But again, I read these books almost a year ago, and I basically I read them. I didn't read like a lot about them. So forgive me if I am getting the name of the series wrong. But these books are really fascinating because there's a loose through line, but basically these four stories are more or less completely separate. You don't need to read these books in chronological order. Also, she didn't write them in chronological order. So I found these books very, very fascinating. The one that is chronologically first is Pattern Master. I like this book. It's almost like a coming of age story, and it's a very kind of universal tale of a man, of a boy becoming a man in this kind of wild place where there's magic, but it's not hyper magical. It's almost sci-fi. I really like this book. I think I would read this book again, which so far, the only other book that I would consider reading again is Parable of the Talents. Unless I wanted to read Parable of the Sower again to prepare myself for Talents, but I would read this book again. It was a fun read. It's an easy read, it's fairly light, and I liked this one. I enjoyed it. These two books have a fatal flaw, I would say. What are the name of these books? Wild Seed and Mind of My Mind. The fatal flaw with these books is that they really revolve around one male character who I found to be not interesting and who I found to not have hardly any character development. He's kind of like a god-like figure. He's super, super strong. People are very, very afraid of him. And it's such a bummer because a lot of the other characters in the books are so interesting. But the fact that like he's involved in so much of it, I wouldn't read it again because of that. Which really, really bums me out because I liked everything else that happened in Wild Seed. Wild Seed was a thrilling read with the exception of that one male character. There's a section where a woman in this book becomes a dolphin and swims with and like lives with the dolphins, and I bought it 100%. Like if I heard that idea, I'd think to myself, that's so weird. I would never enjoy reading something like that. So I really enjoyed reading these books. This one is not prehistoric, but it goes way back in time, and it is written over the course of like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. This one is set in modern day, and I would maybe encourage you to read Wild Seed before reading Mind of My Mind, but it really doesn't matter. I read Mind of My Mind before I read Wild Seed, and I didn't really think it was a big deal. Okay, this book, Clay's Ark, I think might be my favorite of the four. This book gets a lot of flack because there is some sexual, violent kinds of interesting, well, not interesting, but I'm trying to talk about this in a way that doesn't give it away and is also not overly explicit for YouTube. But basically, if you are extremely shy about sexually violent things, then there may be stuff in this book that really turns you off. If you can understand that the world is dark and dark characters do dark things, I loved this book. I thought it was very, very fascinating. I read this book first. I wish I had read this book last. But even though I did read it first, I still was able to appreciate it. I really like Clay's Ark. All of the characters are interesting. Everything that happens in it is interesting. Also, I'm thinking that I may have the order wrong. Maybe I'll Google that before the next section. But before I end, Bloodchild is a collection of short stories written by Octavia E. Butler. And the one of the main short stories in here is called Blood Child. I enjoyed all of the short stories in this book. I absolutely love Bloodchild. I think it's now my favorite short story of all time. It explores how a human race and an alien race could coexist, especially if under those conditions they needed one another to reproduce, and they were both intelligent and moral. And what does that look like? How does that play out in society? To be able to tackle an idea as complex as that. Not only that, but also she tackles the idea of what if males in the human race carried the weight of having to be the one who gives birth, who are the portion of the race that is impregnated. The fact that she can tackle all of that in like 20 minutes in a couple pages, absolutely riveting, fascinating. I loved Bloodchild. So that is it for Octavia E. Butler, the books I read by Octavia E. Butler in 2025. Okay, I just Googled it. The only mistake that I made is Pattern Master is not the first one, it's the last one. So chronologically, it goes Wild Seed, and then Mind of My Mind, and then Clay's Arc, and then Pattern Master is set way into the future. Now, again, that's not the order that she wrote them in. I read them in the order that she wrote them, but now having read them that way, I would encourage you to read them in chronological order. But I don't know. Honestly, my real opinion is what I said at the beginning. It doesn't matter which order you read them in. So read a little bit about each of those books, and whichever one kind of appeals to you the most, I'd say start with that one. Okay, I forgot two Octavia E. Butler books. One of them is called Survivor. I did not read Survivor. To my understanding, Survivor was released after Octavia had died. And also, to my understanding, Octavia didn't think that Survivor was good enough to be put out. And I've also heard reviews that people aren't like huge fans of that book in general. So I chose to not read it. But the other book that she may be most famous for, that I totally forgot to grab, is Kindred. And oh my goodness, I absolutely loved Kindred. I would 100% read this again many times. This is a book that I would maybe read once a year. It's so, so, so good. It is a science fiction book of a black modern day woman who is married to a white man who, for some unexplicable reason, travels back in time several times throughout the narrative of the book and has to interact with her like a distant family member who happens to be an owner of slaves. And it takes course. That's I'm just gonna say that much because I don't want to give too much else away. To be completely honest with you, I went into this book thinking that it wasn't going to be as good as it was because the reviews that I heard about it sounded like everyone just liked it because it dealt with the topic of slavery, and that like it was cool to like this book because Octavia said slavery bad, and I was like, okay, it's going to be one of those books that like is just resting on the laurels of the topics that it's covering. But this is so well written. The characters are so relatable. Uh, Everyone has depth. There's no one character who is all good or all evil. Um, I absolutely love this book, and I very, very much look forward to reading it again in the coming years. This year, I also fell in love with Stephen King. I had never read a Stephen King book before, and I had no idea what to expect. I kind of thought that it was going to be like popular novels, kind of easy to digest, which they are in a way, but they're also just I don't know. He has a blue collar virtuosity to him, is what I'd say. Is that the books are very approachable and they're very well written. They're very, very good. So I read Misery. I read Night Shift, which is a collection of short stories. I also read Salem's Lot and I read The Institution. Very, very quickly, The Institution, the story is so, so good. It's like modern Stephen King. Um, and I didn't think that the ending was very good, which is a common critique of King's books, is that he can set up something really interesting, but the ending isn't as great. Salem's Lot was fantastic. It's in the other room. Let me grab it. Salem's Lot, baby. Classic. Well, not technically a classic, but just in like to use a common phrase of classic, like classic vampire book. Uh, I still think about the characters in this book, and I read it like almost a year ago at this point, and I adore this book. It's really, really good. Misery, I think, is one of my favorite books ever written. Misery is about a famous author who gets to be imprisoned in the home of one of his fanatic fans. And his fanatic fan tortures him in order to get him to write a book that he doesn't want to write. And it is an analogy for addiction. It's an analogy for fame. It's an analogy for being a famous artist. And the amount of tension and depth that he can build in this book, where basically the entirety of the book happens in one room between two people, is absolutely amazing. I love, 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 love Misery. Night Shift. There is, I think it's called I Am the Hand, or I Am the Doorway. I Am the Doorway was so, so good. I think I Am the Doorway is my favorite short story in here. The Boogeyman was really, really great. Quitters Incorporated is incredible. That's another thing that's interesting about these short stories, is I would say that like 90% of them, 80% of them are horror, but 10 or 20% is just kind of like fascinating, interesting kinds of stories. Yeah, like Children of the Corn is in here, which you may be familiar with the movie based off of that short story. But yeah, I really, really liked Night Shift. And in addition to those fiction books of Stephen King's, I also read his nonfiction book, which is called On Writing. This talks about his process of how he writes, and it's also a bit of a memoir. He talks about like writing in his early years, how he got his break. Later on in life, he was hit by a car, going through that injury, and just having children and writing during all of these things that are happening in his life. And I can say that I love his writing so much more having read this. I have so much more of an appreciation for his process, for his prolific work. Where, like before, I was saying that a lot of people criticize King because maybe he isn't the best at ending his stories. But at the end of the day, like Stephen King, he's not out to write the single greatest story ever. He's out to write like the stories that are in his head and to get them out quickly. And that is something that I can really respect. So I really enjoyed reading a little bit of nonfiction about this fiction writer. So that right there, it was a bit of Stephen King for me this year. Alrighty, this year I read a fair amount of nonfiction, a lot of it having to do with psychology, some of it being a little self-helpy. So let's get into these books. I'd like to start with the one that I would say was the most helpful for me overall in terms of like reading one book and getting the most practical things out of it. Don't Shoot the Dog by Karen Pryor. This book is a book written by an animal trainer on the process of positive reinforcement and understanding behavior not only in animals but also in humans. The whole idea with this book is to understand that if we would like to increase the likelihood of a behavior happening again, the best way to do that is to reinforce that behavior positively. And how there is a difference between reinforcing behavior and reinforcing individuals. And the fact is we get that confused a whole lot. The other thing is to understand that if we are negatively reinforcing a behavior, basically what we are doing is we are punishing that behavior. And if we are negatively reinforcing a person, we're punishing that person. And how a lot of the times we don't understand that we think that we're positively reinforcing something when in actuality that same action can be punishing a behavior or a person. So this has been extremely helpful for me understanding my own behavior and how to increase the likelihood that I continue to do stuff that brings me closer to my goals in the future. I absolutely love this book. I don't know if I can wholeheartedly recommend it. I don't know if I got a lot out of this book because I've been kind of studying behavior stuff and psychology stuff in general. All I can tell you is that I found this book at the perfect time and I absolutely devoured it. Read it like 4 times front to back, talked to a lot of different people about it, and I cannot say enough good things about this book. I absolutely loved it. Up next, we can talk about the man, the myth, the legend, Dr. Albert Ellis. Dr. Albert Ellis is the creator of a branch of therapy called REBT, which stands for Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. And a lot of his followers and the people who studied his principles went on to create CBT, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And you may be familiar with CBT because CBT scientifically is the most helpful branch of therapy. It is understood that CBT helps the most amount of people, the most amount of times, most amount of the time when compared to other therapies. If you asked me to cite where I heard that, I have no idea. So maybe I shouldn't say things like that on the internet. This is actually one of the reasons why I've been putting off talking about these books, is because I'm an expert of the guitar and of harmony. And I can say things about the guitar and music with confidence. But with psychology, I read books and I like it. So, I can't speak with like an authoritative confidence about those things. So anyway, but maybe by practicing talking about these books more, I can practice speaking in such a way where I'm talking about my opinions and my personal experience rather than making these outlandish claims about how CBT is the most scientifically accurate, helpful branch of therapy, even though if you asked me to prove that for you, I would not know where to look. It's just something I heard while I was researching everything. Anyway, talking about these. So thank you for your patience with me as I'm just some guy on the internet talking about books that I read. And I hope at the very least this is enjoyable for you to hear me blabbering on about the things that I enjoy. These books, we've got Overcoming Procrastination, We've got the myth of self-esteem. We've got how to stubbornly refuse to make yourself miserable about anything. And we've got a guide to rational living. The thing about Albert Ellis is people criticize him for, like, people say that Albert Ellis writes the same book over and over and over again and just changes the cover and changes a couple little things about it, but it's just the same principles over and over and over. To which I say, yes. Yes, yes, yes. That's exactly what I want. I want to learn the principles. I want to study the principles. And I want to study those principles over and over and over and over and over again in different flavors so that I can get that much better at these amazing REBT principles. So let's start with the one that I would recommend people start with. This book is embarrassing to recommend because it has the worst title ever. It's so cringy. How to Stubbornly Refuse to Make Yourself Miserable About Anything. Yes, anything. But this is a fantastic place to start. It's the most accessible place to start reading Albert Ellis. And it's going to be a wonderful intro, not just an intro, but a really great introduction to his principles. And basically, the whole thing with REBT is that as human beings, we are constantly, always experiencing our life in 3 dimensions. We are always thinking, we are always feeling, and we are always behaving. And those 3 things are constantly happening, and they're constantly influencing one another. So Albert Ellis takes the position of, if we can replace our more irrational thoughts with more rational thoughts, then those more rational thoughts will increase the likelihood that we also have more rational emotions, and that we also engage in more rational behaviors. And if we engage in more rational behaviors, it increases the likelihood that we live a life that we enjoy. And that is a beautiful, beautiful concept to me. It is something that means a lot to me, and I love practicing through these principles. I could talk for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours about how that shakes out. But all I'll say now is that if that sounds interesting to you at all, oh, here's one other thing that I'll mention, is another kind of along those same lines. Albert Ellis says something to the extent of, any human being could be rid of their extreme, irrational, negative emotions if they only learned how to replace their irrational beliefs with more rational beliefs. And I have certainly found that to be the case. I still have negative emotions, but nowadays they tend to be much more reasonable negative emotions instead of those crazy, intense negative emotions that I thought I couldn't handle at all. I thought that I just couldn't stand it. And Albert Ellis, as well as Dr. Trevor Kashey and everyone at Dr. Trevor Kashey Nutrition, have helped me understand that I can stand it. Because I'm still breathing. I'm still alive. If I couldn't stand it, I'd be dead. Okay, moving on. This is a great introduction. If any of that sounds interesting to you, I highly recommend you check out this book. If that doesn't sound interesting to you, then don't worry about it. Don't read it. I'm sure you figure out, there's lots of different ways to live life and lots of different ways to overcome our extreme negative emotions. And I don't think that Albert Ellis's method is the only way. But I will say that for myself, Albert Ellis's method, it's hands down been absolutely the most helpful way. So this book, Overcoming Procrastination, is specifically about procrastination, going through those same principles, right? The self-esteem myth, this is so good. This is an entire book talking about separating the difference between judging our behaviors and judging ourselves. And I think that a lot of Western religions focus a lot on judging ourselves, and a lot of Eastern religions focus a lot on zero judgment. But Albert Ellis finds this other path where we can judge our behaviors. Like if we do something that we're not happy about, let's judge that behavior as something that we don't like. But we never need to judge ourselves for engaging in that behavior. Getting to the point where we see ourselves as a human being that is too complex to ever be judged. But our behaviors are simple and can be judged, and it's helpful to judge our behaviors because we'd like to do better in the future for the enjoyment of ourselves and to increase the likelihood that other people enjoy their lives as well, which I find very, 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 very beautiful. So this book is a little more thick. It's a little more academic. What he does is he basically takes a bunch of different examples of different therapies and different religions and talks about how his perspective differs a little bit from those perspectives. And he has a pretty aggressive way of talking, but I felt in general he was pretty respectful to other perspectives. A Guide to Rational Living. To be completely honest with you, I don't remember this one as much. But I did read it because there's a lot of dog-eared stuff and there's a lot of underlined stuff. I'm pretty sure my impression of this book is that it was basically just this book round two. And I remember thinking that some of the examples were really, really helpful. Like he does this thing where he will write out like a couple paragraphs of him going back and forth with a client, like in therapy. And I found for myself that reading those exchanges out loud was super, super helpful for me to understand the principles and to increase the likelihood that I could use those principles for myself in the future to help myself. So yeah, Albert Ellis and Karen Pryor. Ooh-wee. So happy I read these books this year. Alrighty. Influencing Human Behavior. This is one of two books that I did not finish. I felt that it was kind of overly simplistic. It is written... When was this written? It was written kind of like... I don't know. It feels a little salesy. Feels a little... First published in 1925. Not to say that the books written in 1925 are bad, but I just wasn't crazy about this book. So I didn't finish reading it. Essentialism. You've probably heard about this book. I liked it. I didn't love it. One thing, though, that I got that was really, really helpful out of this book is the idea that it's helpful to create space in between things. Like you create a little bit of extra room in your budget. You create a little bit of extra space in your calendar because you can't always account for things. So this book is about, instead of minimalism, which values having the fewest amount of things possible that you absolutely need, essentialism, rebranding, right, is about having the things that are essential to your success and your happiness. So it's basically minimalism-ish stuff without the holier than thou kind of moral mindset on top of it. So I liked it. I won't read it again. I plan on donating that book, but I did like it. Learning to Love was a very interesting book. This is a book about a lot of experiments that were done on monkeys. And this was recommended to me by someone who is much smarter than I am. And I thought that they were probably in a position to get a lot more out of this book than I am. I'm not a scientist, and I feel like maybe I don't understand the depth of the significance of what I read. But if you are interested in learning about scientific research for how monkeys love their children, you can check this book out. I am not planning on reading it again. This is a book about back pain. It's kind of like a famous book about back pain. This book doesn't really say anything. It's kind of a big sales pitch for working with him directly, which is not a bad thing. But basically the entire book, he's like, your back pain is basically emotional issues that you're not dealing with. And that was a pretty powerful idea for me. And that was helpful for me to expose myself to that idea. And I think it's helped for me in my journey with my back pain. But I would not say that this book really like answers any questions. The entire book is basically like him saying, most people think that back pain is because of this issue. Well, that's wrong. Most people think that back pain is this issue. Well, that's wrong. So and so came to me and I helped them treat their back pain, but then he doesn't tell you like how he treats them. So it's like 90% of the book is like a sales pitch, and then 10% of the book is kind of his principles and perspectives of like, hey, maybe we should be dealing with our emotions. And there's really no answers in it. So if you're looking to basically, I can't recommend this book because it's basically a sales pitch. I did enjoy reading it though. I'm happy I read it. I wish maybe I only read the first 40% or so. I'm not happy that I finished the entire book. Another book that I read was Zen Heart by Ezra Beta. Beta, is that how you say his name? This is a book about Zen Buddhism. I liked reading it. I enjoyed it at the time. I don't remember anything that I read in it. I was practicing meditation a lot while I was reading this. I felt like it helped inform that a little bit. Again, I'm happy I read it. If you're really interested in Zen Buddhism, I think I can recommend this, but it didn't change my life or anything. But I'm happy I read it. The Message. This book was so painful to read. Online, on YouTube, there's so many people talking about how this book is revolutionary and incredible and artistic. This book is all fluff and no substance. And I read it with a best friend of mine at the time who, in my opinion, she's a lot more open to those sorts of things, and she also hated it. So I am not a big fan of this book. I did not enjoy reading it at all. I finished it just to make sure that I didn't like it all the way. I finished this book out of spite. I did not enjoy reading this book at all. Another book called Dopamine by Anna Lembke. This one is like not revolutionary. I don't think I learned anything new in this book. I just thought it was like interesting to read. She's a therapist. She talks about some of her interactions with clients who are addicted to substances that you wouldn't necessarily think are like addictive. So for one instance, she has a client who's like addicted to masturbating. And she talks about her own addiction to reading romance novels, and she talks about dopamine in general. And I'm happy I read it. I'll probably donate this book. It was a fine read. It was a fine read. Okay, let's talk about Michael Easter. Boom. Earlier, I was talking about Trevor Kashey Nutrition. A group that I've been a part of for the past 2 years is this group, Trevor Kashey Nutrition. They've been very, very, very helpful in me decreasing the likelihood that I engage in binge eating behaviors, which is something that I've struggled with for my entire life. And most people come to Trevor Kashey Nutrition because they read this book, The Comfort Crisis. I came to Trevor Kashey Nutrition because Trevor Kashey is a good friend of Alex Hormozi, and I was listening to a lot of Alex Hormozi content at the time. So you may be familiar with The Comfort Crisis. So this guy, Michael Easter, wrote these 2 books. The Comfort Crisis is basically, it's like, hey, everybody's too comfortable in the United States of America. That's basically what this book is. Scarcity Brain is kind of like about dopamine and how you get addicted to things. I really liked Comfort Crisis, but not for the reason that most people like it. So I think that most people, because I've been on these calls in Trevor Kashey Nutrition, and I hear a lot of people talk about how much they like this book, and they talk about like, man, it's just really opened my eyes to like how comfortable I've been, and if I really want to, become the person I want to become, then I can't, I want to be uncomfortable sometimes to be able to like grow and, kind of that like self-helpy kind of stuff. I love the way this book is written. So this book, the kind of the big through line of the book is this big hunting trip that he goes on. I think it's in Alaska, but it's been months since I've read this book, so I don't remember all the fine little details. So, and I love the way he describes this hunting trip. He writes about it so poetically. I felt like I was there with them in the cold, hunting these animals with them. And I thought it was a very compelling story. I absolutely loved it. And then he basically he puts these little vignettes um, sandwiched in his telling of this hunting story, and it all kind of comes together at the end to paint this picture of, you know, maybe you don't want to be comfortable every second of every day, because at the end of a life that is too comfortable, it actually leads to a lot of discomfort, right? Scarcity Brain, I didn't like this book. I didn't enjoy reading it. It's a fine book if you don't really know anything about dopamine or how the addiction process works. Then I think that this is a great introduction to that. But I was pretty familiar with a lot of those concepts, and um, there's kind of an overarching narrative, but I didn't think it was nearly as strong. I just didn't really enjoy this book very much. One thing that I will say is that it challenged my perspective on something that I think about politically, but that's like was not intended. So that was nice. Like, it is nice when I power through a book I'm not really enjoying and I still get something out of it. Um, so that's more of a comment on reading in general rather than this book. But yeah, I didn't like Scarcity Brain very much, but I did like Comfort Crisis. Alrighty, everyone, we are on the home stretch, baby. Okay, let's talk about some cute little small books. I read The Pearl. I also read Avalanche. So, The Pearl is kind of like a parable written by John Steinbeck. I actually don't know if this is an original story of John Steinbeck's or if this is kind of his reimagining of a classic parable. I love this book. I love this story. I was reminded that I actually read this in high school and I forgot about it. It's a beautiful story. I love the way that he writes, and he's one of the authors that I would like to prioritize reading more in 2026. Avalanche is the first book that I ever really loved on my own when I was a kid. I don't remember the exact year that I read this book, but I think I was like 11 years old, something like that. I started reading this book. I think I was sick, like I had a cold or something one day, and this book was laying around, and I started reading it, and I couldn't put it down, and I read the entire book in one sitting. And it was the first time I really loved reading. And this year, I had fallen in love with reading again, so I wanted to see if this book was still good. And dude, it holds up. I mean, it's a book written for children, so it's not going to knock your socks off or anything. But the characters are interesting. The family dynamics were interesting. The story is interesting and gripping. It doesn't overstay its welcome. Obviously, it's a very small book. But I'm so happy as a 34-year-old man that I still really enjoyed reading the book that I read when I was 11. It gives me, like, I don't know, throughout life, like, you change a fair amount. I'd like to think I'm a very different person now than I was when I was like 25 or 19 or even 11. But the fact that this is a through line, that the 34-year-old version of me and the 11-year-old version of me loves Avalanche, that makes me really happy. And those are the only two times I've ever read that book. So that's another nice thing about reading too, is like, the books don't change, but we change, and when we see different things, when we reread the books, it's kind of it's a little bit of a nice reflection in the mirror, if you will. Another book I read is Disney War. This thing is a big old boy. I did skip some boring parts. I think I read like 80% of it or 90% of it. So I didn't skip that much. But basically, This is the story of Eisner's rise and fall from fame, one of the CEOs of Disney. I thought this was a fascinating read because it gave me a lot of interesting behind the scenes stories about lots of Disney movies and productions that I grew up loving and watching. And it also paints a really clear picture of how so much that went wrong in this corporation and so much that went wrong in Michael Eisner's life was a direct result of him being unwilling to have direct conversations with people about conflict. And I wasn't there. I don't know if that's the simple narrative, but that was one of the things that I got from reading this book. Very enjoyable read. If you are interested in Disney at all, I highly recommend. It's well written, except for, I guess, the boring parts, which I skipped. Staying on the subject of big old fat books, this year I read the entirety of The Count of Monte Cristo. So The Count of Monte Cristo, the movie with Jim Caviezel, has been like my favorite movie ever since I was about 12 years old. I've always wanted to read the book, and this year I decided was the year that I was going to read it. And I'm so happy I read this book. I love one of the things that I've heard on YouTube of people reviewing this book is that they loved every page. I basically felt that way. It's a very, very exciting read. It's not incredibly cerebral. Like, this book was written in an episodic format to be printed in newspapers in France to get people to read the newspaper more often. So this is basically like pop culture book in a way. Um, Dumas is he's almost like to that time period what Stephen King is to the 90s, I would say. So this book isn't going to like push you intellectually necessarily, but there is a lot of depth. There's a lot of humanity here. One of the things that I find the most interesting is the movie that I love kind of has the themes of revenge, whereas the book more so has the themes of providence. And a lot of the same kind of actions play out, but it's really fascinating to see those same actions through a different lens. And obviously, since there's it's like 800 pages or something, or a little bit over 1,000. Since there's 1,000 pages, there's a lot more. There's a lot more detail, and I absolutely love the book. One of the things that's really interesting is I actually do prefer some of the things in the movie still. So it's nice that they both kind of hold up for me. There are things about the movie I love. There are things about the book that I love. But I think about The Count of Monte Cristo all the time. I will certainly read this book again. I don't know that I'm going to read it again like this year, but over the course of my life, I could see myself reading this book several other times. I absolutely loved it. Okay, another interesting one was Orbital. This book was interesting for me because I did not enjoy reading it while I was reading it, but after reading it, letting it simmer for like a week or two, I'm really happy that I did read it. So here's the thing is that this pretends to be a novel, but there's no story. There's no character development. What's going on is over the course, so this book takes place in the space station, in the International Space Station. And I think there's like 6 crew members or something like that. I'm probably getting the number wrong. Again, it's been a while since I've read this book. Maybe like, I don't know, I read it like 6 months ago. So I don't remember every single detail. But really quickly, I think it's almost interesting to do like book recaps after I've read it like months and months ago because the important stuff sticks, right? Anyway, when you're in the International Space Station, the International Space Station orbits the Earth a certain amount of times during a 24-hour period. I think it's 16 times. So what this book is written in is it's basically like 16 chapters. One chapter for each of the times that it orbits the Earth. I'm looking through to see if I can see how many orbits there are. That'll take too much time. I think it's 16. I could be wrong. So you get these little slice of life vignettes of what it's like to live on the International Space Station. It tries at times to tell some story and some character development, and I just feel like from a narrative perspective, it kind of fell flat. Like there's some pretty prose, there's some interesting people, but from just like a meat and potatoes, like story, character development, there's absolutely none of that in here. So when I finished reading this book, I was like, ugh, it wasn't a book. That was a waste of time. I really didn't like it. And then a week or two letting it simmer, I think that it gave me a little bit of a feeling of what it would be like to be in space. And that was really nice. And I'm really happy that I got to have that feeling and that experience. So I'm happy I read it. I'm happy it wasn't longer, because if it was a really long book, I still think that it wouldn't have been worth it. But the fact that it was a short read, it was a poetic read, I'm happy I read it. I will not read it again. I'll probably donate that book. Another book I read is Just Kids by Patti Smith. So this is a book about Patti Smith and her relationship with, goodness gracious, I'm totally forgetting his name, Robert Mapplethorpe. So Patti Smith is a famous songwriter, musician. Robert is a famous photographer, and it is about them being young, being in love in New York City in the 70s, I believe. And I was recommended this book by someone who worked at like a hip, trendy bookstore in Salt Lake City, Utah. And he pitched this to me as like, this is one of the saddest books I've ever read. I cried so much. It's so heart-wrenching, all this stuff. Like, I really think that, we were talking for a little bit. He's like, I really think you're going to enjoy it. So I've been putting off reading this book, thinking that it was going to be like so sad, so heart-wrenching. Finally, recently, I was like ready to read it. I didn't feel like this book was sad at all. I feel like it was a really beautiful story of two human beings living their life, being in New York City, being artists, making things happen, struggling through the things that you struggle with when you're in your early 20s in a big city. I loved this book. I don't think I would read it again, but I really, really loved reading it. Yeah, I love Just Kids. If you're an artist, if you like New York City, if you like Patti Smith or Robert Mapplethorpe, then I think I can wholeheartedly recommend that book. The book that I'm saving to talk about for the last has been my heartbreak. So, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. I've read No Country for Old Men and The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and I love No Country for Old Men. I like The Road. There's a lot of things I appreciate about it. I'm a big fan of The Last of Us Part 1, if you're familiar with that video game. That video game is very, very heavily based on The Road, so part of my love for The Road is kind of tied into The Last of Us. This is known as Cormac McCarthy's bloodiest book, and it's a Western. And I have been looking forward to reading this for so long. And this book right here is where I stopped reading it. This is my second DNF for the year. My second did not finish. And it's heartbreaking, but I just can't get into this book. I don't care about the characters. I don't care about any of the characters. There's no character development. And I was on a huge reading like binge towards the beginning of the year. And when I tried to read this book, it really put a halt on my reading, because I want to have read this book, but I just do not enjoy reading it. So I had been putting off reading, and it just makes me sad. As a reader, I'm still trying to develop the skill of identifying when to finish a book and when to stop reading a book. Because like I've said a couple times, like with Orbital, I'm happy I finished it because I liked it, right? With The Message, I'm happy I finished it because at the very least now I can have a very confident opinion about why I don't like it and how I don't like it. But I was so excited to read this book, and I can't have an opinion about it because I've only read half of it, but I also just don't like it at all. And it doesn't make sense to try to continue to force myself to read it because it's been months now that this has been half read. And I'll pick it up like every couple weeks and try again. And I just don't like it. And it breaks my heart that I don't like it. So I guess what I can say is maybe one day in the future, maybe years in the future, I'll get to the point where Blood Meridian is that I'm in a good place for it. But it just makes me so sad that this is the DNF. So those are all the books I read. Now I'll do a couple little awards and have some closing thoughts. Alrighty. So some awards. What was the most helpful book that I read? The book that changed my life the most? That was Don't Don't Shoot the Dog. Goodness gracious. This is one of those books that I'll probably read at least once a year for the rest of my life. Incredible book. Book that made me think the most while I was reading it. The most kind of thought-provoking. Self-Esteem, The Myth of Self-Esteem by Albert Ellis. Oh, is this upside down? It totally is. The Self-Esteem Myth by Albert Ellis. Incredible book. If you're interested about those topics that I was talking about earlier, I would highly recommend you check it out. The book that I liked the least, no surprise, The Message. Really did not enjoy any of the pages in that book, unfortunately. The book that I enjoyed reading the most this year was Misery by Stephen King. Absolutely incredible. The book that I think about the most now, having read these books, which one is kind of floating around in my mind the most often? Certainly The Self-Esteem Myth. It comes up so often when I'm talking about myself, when I'm talking with friends, when I'm hearing other people talk about themselves, when I'm hearing other people talk about other people. It's like all the time people are putting labels on human beings. And it's like, guys, if we just labeled the behavior and not the human being, it's like so much gets better. At least I've found that to be the case. Here's an interesting one. If I could wipe my memory for just one book and read it again fresh, out of all these books, which one would I wipe my memory and read it again fresh? That would be Clay's-Ark. I really enjoyed this book, and to be able to read it again, totally fresh, experience the highs and lows. I think it's a wonderfully paced book. There's tension the entire time. It ends with a bang, and it's not just a bang at the very end. Like it's a drawn out climax, but it doesn't overstay its welcome. I care about all of the characters. And again, this is one of those books where like there's no clear good and bad people. Like everyone is a mixture and an amalgamation of goodness and evil. And I really liked it. It's not for everybody. Like I said before, it's certainly not for everybody, but I really, really liked it. I'm looking forward to reading it again, even though I can't wipe my memory. And my book of the year, my absolute favorite book of the year, maybe you can guess, maybe by the fact that it's not sitting over here, and maybe you've already deduced which book this is, but my favorite book of the year was The Count of Monte Cristo. Love this book. Looking forward to reading it More in the future. So, yeah, 2025 has been a wonderful year of reading for me. It feels really great to have fallen in love with reading again as an adult. And reading is so many things to me. It's an escape. It's a way to travel without having to travel. It's a way to meet other people, these fictional characters, sometimes non-fictional characters, like with just kids, uh, or the um, or the psychology books. It's a way for me to be able to learn new concepts. It's a way for me to be able to de-stress. And I think the biggest thing that reading is for me is it is one of the ways to practice thinking. And goodness gracious, like what could be more important than that? Yeah. I'm really thankful for all these authors. I'm thankful for the books themselves. I'm thankful for the time that I have. I'm thankful for my health and having the opportunity to read all of these books. And I'm thankful for all of you who are listening to this hour-long video of me talking about the books I read this year. I don't know if I'll ever do this again. I don't know if I'll continue talking about books, but I thought it might be fun to make this video here. So thank you for listening. I intend to keep this YouTube channel mostly focused on guitar stuff and music stuff, but I also really like books. And I think it would be fun if I could learn to talk about books in a way that is much more me talking about what I enjoy, what I get out of them, rather than, trying to like teach somebody something or like trying to be an authority. Because I'm definitely not an authority on books or on psychology or anything. That's it for today. I appreciate you. Let me know what books you're planning on reading in 2026. I'm planning on reading some John Steinbeck, like I had mentioned earlier. On the nonfiction side, I don't have too much planned right now, but I'm sure stuff will come in the year. And yeah, happy reading. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.